Well, happy Saturday, everybody. I started my day listening to one of my Yanni CDs, Dare to Dream. I just love Yanni's music. I think that anybody who doesn't probably just hasn't heard enough. But for me, it was an excellent way to start a Saturday morning. One of my favorite fiction authors was a guy named Tony Hillerman. He lived in Albuquerque or Santa Fe, I can't remember which. And he wrote about the adventures of the Navajo tribal police, specifically some characters named Lieutenant Joe Leaphorn, Sergeant Jim Chee, and Chee's wife, well, she was his girlfriend later, she turned out to be his wife, Officer Bernadette Manuelito, who also worked for the Navajo tribal police. And the action took place mostly on the Navajo reservation out in the Four Corners area, which is actually the largest Indian reservation in the United States. The Navajos are the largest tribe left in the United States. There is tribal sovereignty with the Indian reservations. There's a government-to-government relationship. The tribes aren't states, but they are component parts of the United States because the Constitution actually says that Congress has the right to handle relations between the United States and the native peoples. That is actually in the Constitution. It's not something people just make up like conservatives do. And so they do have their own governments, their own police forces. State governments, local governments don't have a lot of authority on the Indian reservations, although the law enforcement agencies do often work together. They have these mutual aid agreements so that you do have county and state officers working on reservations sometimes. And you also have the tribal police, and major crimes fall under the jurisdiction of the FBI because the Indian reservations are a special jurisdiction. You have the major reservations out in the west, the Navajo reservation, and right smack in the middle of that is the Hopi reservation. It is completely surrounded by the Navajo reservation, so they have their own governments and they have their own laws. Most of the bigger ones are out in the west, like the Navajo reservation or the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. That is the Western Cherokees. There are also Eastern Cherokees. When you get over to the eastern United States, specifically the southern part, you do have some smaller groups and smaller reservations. There's the Mississippi Band of Choctaws, there's the Poarch Creeks in Florida, and the Eastern Band of Cherokees in North Carolina. And those are all reservations, and they have similar sovereignty as well. But especially in the west, you have even smaller divisions, more like towns or villages, called pueblos. And those pueblos are just like the reservations. They have self-government and they can have their own police, their own authority as well. But Tony Hillerman wrote about the adventures of the Navajo tribal police, and one reviewer said that he had no idea that so much crime and mystery happened out in Indian country, and in fact it does. In a recent year, they had about 289,000 service calls for the Navajo tribal police. This huge area that covers the Four Corners area, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. And so things can get a little bit complicated with some of the crimes that occur there because you do have different jurisdictions all crossed up, but the Navajo police have authority over the entire reservation across 4 states, and they work it out with these mutual aid agreements so that some of those Navajo cops are actually certified cops in all of the 4 states because they have to transport non-Indians to jail and things like that. So I was always fascinated by Tony Hillerman's work. He deals with an area of the United States that I love the most. I also like the Northwest. The Northwest and the Southwest complement each other. The Southwest is a hot, dusty region, although it's very beautiful in the spring and the fall. Spring and the fall, you can't beat the Southwest. The winters are fairly mild, although last year there was a snowstorm in El Paso and also New Mexico and areas of Old Mexico. there was a snowstorm. Summers are ridiculously hot, but it's dry heat, and that does make a difference as opposed to the heat that you have out in the eastern United States, the southeast in particular, where it can feel like the jungle in July and August. So Hillerman wrote a lot about the Navajo tribal police and crime and mystery and everything that happened out there. His career started in about 1970 or so with a book called The Blessing Way. And The Blessing Way was a Navajo ritual that he had witnessed, I think, when he was in the military, and he became intrigued with Navajo culture. So he started his long series of books with The Blessing Way in 1970, and it followed the adventures of Sergeant Joe Leaphorn, who eventually retired and became a private detective, while Jim Chee sort of worked his way up with the Navajo tribal police, but then came back down to sergeant because he didn't like the paperwork. And Burnett Manuelito was his love interest for a very long time, and they strung each other along for a while. He was in love with this Navajo lawyer for the Justice Department named Janet Pete, but she liked Washington culture more than she liked Navajo country. Well, Tony Hillerman died in 2008, and that was the end of his writing. But in the last 3 years or so, Tony's daughter, Anne Hillerman, has taken up the mantle. So this is her first novel, Anne Hillerman. I don't know if you can see this, but the title is The Spider Woman's Daughter, and I'm about 100 pages into that. And that title is fairly typical. There are a lot of metaphors related to Navajo culture in Tony Hillerman's writings. And I've got to say, Anne is doing a magnificent job. The characters are recognizable. The setting is recognizable. I think Anne is just doing a fantastic job carrying on her father's legacy. When I read Anne's novel here, I think I'm reading a Tony Hillerman book. I mean, it's almost a duplicate. It does seem that retired Lieutenant Joe Leaphorn's housemate may be going to turn out to be a bad person after all. He'd been living with this professor for about 5 years or so, and it looked like maybe they were going to get married or something, but now he's been shot in the hospital, and this professor lady that he lives with is off nowhere to be found, and his friends Chee and Manuelito, who actually consider themselves part of his family, they are investigating all this, and it's just a fascinating read. Like I said, I think Anne Hillerman has done a fantastic job of carrying out Tony's legacy, and I know she's got one more book out. As soon as I get done with this one, I'm going to read that one, and I hope that Anne will just go ahead and carry on that legacy. It's been going since 1970, and then it stopped for a while after Tony died in 2008. But here's a little bit from the jacket of Anne Hillerman's book, Spider Woman's Daughter. It says, "It happened in an instant. After breakfast with colleagues, Navajo Nation police officer Bernadette Manuelito sees a sedan careen into the parking lot and hears a crack of gunfire. When the dust clears, someone very close to her is lying on asphalt in a pool of blood," and he's still alive, by the way, even though he got shot in the head. "With the victim in the hospital fighting for his life, every person in the squad and the local FBI office is hell-bent on catching the gunman. Bernie, too, wants in on the investigation, despite regulations strictly forbidding eyewitness involvement. Her superior may have ordered her to take some leave, but that doesn't mean she's going to sit idly by, especially when her husband, Sergeant Jim Chee, is put in charge of finding the shooter." Pooling their skills, Bernie and Chee discover that a cold case involving Chee's former boss and partner, retired Lieutenant Joe Leaphorn, may hold the key to the shooting. Digging into the old investigation with discriminating eyes and a fervent urgency, husband and wife find themselves inching closer to the truth with every clue, and closer to a killer who will do anything to prevent justice from taking its course. So that's the teaser from Anne Hillerman's book, Spider Woman's Daughter. So if you like these mystery and suspense novels, and you'd like to read one or possibly see one in a setting that's a little bit different from what most people are used to, I'll tell you, the setting really adds a lot to these Hillerman books. Quite different. Although, some of the plots may seem similar, but the setting makes these books spectacular, and they usually always come to a satisfying end. So I said, I've always been a fan of Tony Hillerman's books. I think I'm going to be a fan of Anne Hillerman's books too now as well. So if you get a chance, if you're not familiar with the Hillermans, I'd suggest next time you get to your local bookstore or library, check out Tony Hillerman's works. And then when you read all of his, as I have, then check out Anne Hillerman. I think you'll find those a fantastic read. And so that is my plug for the Hillermans on this happy Saturday morning. Have a great day, everybody.